Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm bringing you week 33 of my 2019 reads. This week was pretty good. I had a lot of reading time, so I got quite a bit read. I read 2 books from my August TBR, plus 2 more that are sort of Jewish heritage, and then 1 other book which was not in English. The first book that I finished from my August TBR was A Very Large Expanse of Sea by Tahereh Mafi. This is a YA contemporary romance which is set right after 9/11, so 1 year after, and it focuses on a Muslim teenage high school student who is dealing with a lot of backlash. So she and her family, they move around quite a bit, and she's joined a new school, and she's dealing with a lot of kind of anger at the way that people treat her because she's Muslim, and she's a hijabi, so she wears the headscarf, so it's very obvious. And just sort of dealing with her own pain, her own hurt, anger at the way that people are treating her, and distancing herself from other people in order to kind of prevent being more hurt than she already has been. And in this school, she ends up, meeting a very all-American boy, and they end up falling in love, and the story is really interesting. It's both very sweet in terms of their relationship and very sort of political and cultural in terms of what their relationship means for them, for their families, for really the entire community around them. I think that this book does a really good job of showing the kind of microaggressions and big aggressions that people face when they are outwardly different, especially if the way that they're different is something that is kind of not very accepted in their surroundings. So just the kind of daily issues that she faces, I think this book does a really good job of showing how people can hurt her both intentionally and unintentionally, even just by asking things because they don't know better, or an English teacher being like, oh no, ESL's down the hall, right? So there's like a lot of content in this book that really shows that frustration of being sort of daily treated differently. It also, I think, does a really good job of contrasting that with the American boyfriend's kind of naivete and privilege. So he just thinks he likes her, and he doesn't see why it's a big deal. He doesn't even understand that it could be a big deal. He's got so much of that privilege that he can't understand how dating her would maybe cause issues and maybe have people treat them differently. And that's a really interesting exploration of his awakening to, oh, you're actually treated differently, and oh, wow, people are a lot more racist than I thought they were. So that I thought was really fascinating too. And all of this is wrapped up in a really, a sweet high school love story, and I think that overall it was just a joy to read. It addressed a lot of really interesting political and cultural issues and provided insight into the daily experience of somebody who is facing a lot of bias and prejudice against them. So I really loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and if you like YA, I think this is a really good one to pick up. Next, I finished If They Come For Us by Fatimah Asghar. This is a poetry collection by a queer Pakistani Kashmiri American immigrant who is, I think, also maybe non-binary, and they were orphaned at a very young age. A lot of this poetry collection centers around identity, centers around heritage, centers around connections. I think that it's really fascinating how in this collection, Asghar explores not only their current identity of, navigating being Muslim and navigating, being perhaps not quite fitting in with some of the traditional values, while also wanting to be very connected to their heritage. I think perhaps because they lost their parents when they were so young, there's this desire to find connection, and a lot of the poetry collection is devoted to this idea of family and heritage, even going back to partition. So the partition of India happened, I believe, in 1947, right after, independence from the British. They decided to split Pakistan and India. so that Pakistan could be Muslim and India could be Hindu, and they sort of just arbitrarily drew a line and said, okay, everybody who's not one of those, switch sides. And it was a big problem. There was a lot of chaos and death and just issues. So in this poetry collection, Asghar explores a lot of those issues of partition, about how that affected families, about this issue of losing your home. And I think that that really plays into Asghar's identity as an immigrant, as an orphan. So that's all just very fascinating. I really thought that the content of this poetry collection was very, very powerful, very, very good, and I loved the mixture of identity and politics. I also thought that the format of the poems was really interesting. There's definitely, more traditional styles of poems in here, but there's also some like running text types of poems, and there's a number of non-traditional format poems. So for example, one of my favorites is, I guess it's not exactly a poem, but it's a microaggressions bingo card. I'll put it up here, and it's just, it explores that idea of the frustrations that somebody could feel just leaving their house each day and having to deal with the way that people view them and treat them. So I thought that this poetry collection was really moving. I thought that it was really insightful. It offered a very good glimpse into the life of somebody who's struggling with their identity, struggling with their heritage, struggling with kind of piecing it all together. So that that journey that they're going through, I thought was really nicely done in this. There is definitely some exploration of things that are a little, I always struggle with things that are a little crude or raw. That brings me out of the moment. So this definitely did that. I'm not sure that it is unjustified though. I think that those are something that made sense in this poetry collection, but I struggled with it, so I couldn't quite get into everything fully. Overall, I gave this poetry collection 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I actually really recommend that you pick this up if you're interested in poetry, if you're interested in politics, if you're interested in sort of cultural diversity and understanding another perspective. Next, I picked up 2 comic books which are related to Jewish heritage, Mouse Volumes 1 and 2 by Art Spiegelman. This is something that was recommended by Reasonable in the comment section of my TBR for August, for Jewish and Muslim Heritage Month. So Reasonable had suggested that before I read Night, which was on my TBR, I should read Mouse. And it just so happened that we own Mouse. I didn't know this, but when I told Sush, he said, "Oh yeah, we have the volumes." So I went ahead and read those this week, and they are pretty powerful. So these comic books are an artist in the 80s talking to his father, who was in the concentration camps in Auschwitz and Dachau, and getting his story, understanding what happened to him, what his life was like. And it's written in a comic book format where people are drawn as different animals. So all of the Jews are drawn as mice, all of the Nazis are drawn as cats. And this is a really interesting series. I think it's very, very approachable and very worthwhile. It kind of alternates between showing the author's father in the modern day as he's this kind of older, crotchety, super difficult guy, and hearing him tell his story about when he was younger, about how, they were part of a rich family in Poland and they were businessmen and they were very successful, and then little by little things were taken away from them and they were moved into ghettos, and then they were taken to the concentration camps, and then just that act of surviving all of those difficult things. And it really is one thing after another thing after another thing. It wasn't just one bad thing, it was a continuation of so many different very difficult situations that it's so impressive that they got through it, and obviously many people did not. There's a very moving scene in the end of the second volume where they're looking at photos of all of those family members before the war, and just almost none of them are left. you know, and that's really powerful. One of my friends in high school was Jewish, and his family was from Amsterdam originally, and he's like, yeah, you know, we don't really have any extended relatives. You know, kind of everybody was killed in the war, and there's very few people left, and that's just heartbreaking that that's the reality, and that it sort of still perpetuates until today, that just families are smaller. They don't have that kind of further back extensive family, and it's just it's a really powerful read, and I think that the comic book does such a good job of presenting the artist's father as very human. You know, it shows everything he went through, but he's never portrayed as this remarkable hero. He's portrayed as such a fallible human, somebody who is really a hustler. His dad was very much a hustler, always kind of trying to trade things, trying to make arrangements, make deals, saying he could do something when he didn't necessarily have the skills, but figuring he could just pick it up, and then that way he'd be useful in some way and they wouldn't kill him. And it's just like understanding that the people who went through all of this are just very, very human, and also showing that the repercussions of what happened really lasted. Just the author's mother had a lot of depression. A lot of depression after that, just losing so many people, and the author's father just became so anxious, and very, very much unable to let go of just that kind of fear and need to find a way to survive, even though he's now safe and comfortable in life and has savings and things like that. He's always afraid it's going to be taken away. And that was really powerful. And the way that that also affected the artist, the way that he grew up, and the effect that that had on kind of the neuroses he developed. So all of that was really, really powerful. I did struggle a little bit with the parts that focused on the author himself. Those weren't as interesting to me, and they kind of were the slower parts of the stories. So for Mouse 1, I gave it 4 stars. It focused just a little bit more on the author. And then Mouse 2, I gave 4.5 stars. Especially, it just had a lot of powerful moments in it. So I highly recommend this. It's a classic, really well known for showing how comics could address very serious issues as well. Lastly, I finished something a little bit lighter, which was a graphic novel adaptation of Coraline by P. Craig Russell, and I read the Spanish version of this. One of my cousins had gotten me this as a gift for Christmas, since she knew that I was going to be trying to read a little bit more in Spanish. And it was definitely so helpful that I had recently read Coraline in English, and there were tons of pictures. I would say overall I had maybe 60% comprehension of the graphic novel, and I think that that was definitely helped out by all of the pictures and having known the story ahead of time. The artwork in this I thought was reasonable. I definitely struggled a little bit with it though, because I've seen the animated movie and I love the way that the animated movie was done. The version in the comic book is very different. So Coraline is blonde, and it's just like a very different style. So I wasn't as engaged in that art style, I think because in my mind, having seen the Coraline movie, that was the way that I imagined Coraline. Also, sometimes the way that Coraline herself was drawn, it seemed very petulant to me. She seemed very whiny and pouty in a way that I really didn't feel she was in the book or in the movie. In the book and the movie, I felt like she was more stubborn and angry and not putting up with stuff, versus in the comic book she just pouts a lot. so that part I wasn't as big on, but the story itself was very, very faithful to the original. I thought that it was a very good adaptation. It did a really good job of making the story flow just in the way that it flowed in the original, and illustrating the things that were important to see, having some sense of creepiness. I just thought that it was a very good and faithful adaptation, but the art style didn't always work for me, and the portrayal of Coraline didn't always work for me. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, so that wraps up week 33 for me. I hope you guys are having great reading weeks as well. If you've read any of the books that I've talked about, please leave me a comment below. Let me know what you thought. Or if you have any recommendations, go ahead and let me know based on what I've read. My next weekly wrap up will be a little bit delayed because I'm going to Worldcon and I'm just not going to film anything while I'm there. So when I come back, I will have an updated thing for week 34, which will be just a little delayed. Hope you guys are having a great reading week, and bye.